bone of the joint, and then move the distal bone of the joint. So what joint am I moving right now?
MCP.
The MCP of the index finger, that's right. So if we're going to measure flexion, there's a couple of ways it could be done. The axis, of course, is going to go on the MCP joint. Proximal arm on the metacarpal, distal arm on the proximal phalanx. I could line up on the side like here to measure. Probably more typically. Let's go ahead and hang it to the side here. Okay, here's the motion we're going to do. I'm going to put the goniometer, the axis right on top of or posterior to the MCP joint. And then we'll do the motion, and then I'll reline it. And you see when you line up the proximal and distal arm, your axis just needs to be over the MCP joint as much as possible. Right? It's going to be the same thing for every other joint. So which joint am I moving here? PIP, right? So let's go ahead and do that motion. And I'm just going to line up the goniometer. I'm going to line up the two arms and have the axis as much as possible over the PIP joint in this case. And then I want to measure the which joint? Oh, we've got to work on that a little bit. Okay, now it might be hard to do this actively. It's going to be hard for him to try to do DIP flexion actively. So it's okay to do, this is kind of a combination of active and passive range of motion. All right, so let's move it as much as we can. All right, I'm going to do my best to line that up without hurting. Help me know if I'm hurting you.
Are you good?
Pushing this too far in there. So you really got to grab the bones and grab the goniometer at the same time and take your measurement. Okay, now this goniometer is designed for fingers. So you just got to get yourself oriented, because you'll notice that the 0 is not at the very beginning or the very end. The 0 is kind of in the middle right there. So I have to see where 0 is and which way I'm going. So we could do the same thing if I'm doing, got some indentations there, so let's look at that. All right, so try to hold that position for me. Okay, so this was 0 right here. So I use the goniometer, and that's showing 92 degrees right there. Okay, so this is nice for doing little finger joints, not for anything else though. So it's just designed for doing fingers. All right, now what about doing extension of those joints? All right, so you can see that for MCP it goes beyond anatomical position, right? So there's a couple of different ways that could be done. I can go ahead and move the thumb out of the way and line up this way and take a measurement. Or I can line it up on the back here and do the same thing and line up the goniometer. Now this becomes difficult once you get past the index finger, because and it'd be nice to have, I have one goniometer where it's cut off like that, but the numbers are so faded you can't read it anymore. So it would be hard to try to do that on the posterior side with the other fingers. So it's probably going to be more likely to be on this side. Go back as far as you can. All right, and that's going to be true for all the other joints too. The PIPs and the DIPs are pretty much going to be at 0, but I can just line up on that side. Okay? So again, I just want to make sure the axis is over the joint that we're measuring. In this case, the pip. In this case, the dip. All right, so pretty straightforward. I don't even know if I'm following the same order. Not really, but sort of. Okay, we've got the NCPs do what other motion besides flexion and extension? So we've got, this would be, and adduction. I'm going to move that out of the way. This would be abduction, and this would be abduction. Okay, very good. So abduction to the left or to the right. All right, so this won't work for doing ab and adduction. So you need to, and actually this one could work for that. And I'll go ahead and use this one. All right, so where's my axis going to be?
Joint.
Pretty straightforward. It's going to be over, in this case, the MCP joint, proximal arm on the second metacarpal, and distal arm on the proximal phalanx. And so I'm just going to line it up, have him do the motion, and take my reading. which in this case looks like it's 22 degrees. What do I have to do? There's not. Okay, so notice there's a question. This is page 144. Finger MCP abduction. And notice there's no average range of motion because evidently nobody has found it significant or important enough to study that sort of thing. All right. Okay, finger adduction is typically not measured because if you can put your fingers together, then you've got enough adduction range of motion. Okay, and I think I covered everything else with the fingers. Okay, so you want to avoid passive insufficiency of motions. So think about that. The comments talk about that. But it's pretty straightforward with the fingers. It's just a matter of kind of getting used to putting the goniometer on the joint and moving the bones and the goniometer at the same time. And being oriented to where the numbers are. In this case, every dash is worth 5 degrees rather than 1 degree as the big ones, or 2 degrees on this one. So you just got to get oriented to your goniometer.
Dr. Jeff,
Yes.
for the dip joint, is it okay if they have a little bit of flexion going on at their
Yeah, it's pretty hard to just really stabilize that. So I'm having to hold him really tight to try to. I mean, I can isolate it here, and that's fine to make that a passive range of motion. But it is kind of hard when you got the goniometer there that you don't cut into them and slash through their finger and hold it that tightly. So go ahead and try to do the motion as much as you can.
I have not.
Okay, so I'm having to kind of do it with the thing. It's kind of hard. It takes a little practice to do that. Yeah. Do you ever measure range of motion of fingers anyway?
Isn't that mainly OT?
Okay, it's generally in hand rehab, which often OT does, but PTs and PTAs are just as capable of doing hand rehab. Okay, anything else with the fingers?
The only one that you're really doing passive is the DIP, right?
Yeah, it's just not that cut and dry, because a lot of these finger motions are just hard to isolate for
Yeah.
people. So it's okay to be making this a combination of, try to do the motion, but I'm also isolating it for you. So, okay. Anything else? All right, the thumb. Now, some of the thumb joints are just as straightforward, so which joint is that? Of the thumb. This joint right here.
MCP.
This is the MCP. Remember, all it does is flexion and extension. Got a little bleeding issue going on there. Let me have the other hand, please. I don't want to put my goniometer on your blood. Not with Ebola and everything. So.
No goodness, don't start that scare.
Okay, so it's going to be very straightforward in terms of just lining up over the MCP and taking the measurement. Let's see, you don't have a whole lot of flexion there. Let's see, so you have got 50, we'll say 51 degrees. What do I have for you? MCP, oh, look at that, 50 degrees? Oh, okay, interesting. All right, so I guess you are kind of there. Okay, and then which joint would that be?
IP.
So interphalange is it the pip or the dip?
IP.
There is no pip and dip at the thumb. So, and again, you're stabilizing the proximal bone, which in this case would be the proximal phalanx, and you're moving the distal bone, which would be the distal phalanx. And again, it's just a matter of lining up the goniometer with that. Okay. Oh, by the way, this can be used for extension also, and that's actually why you have numbers going the other direction of the 0 on this one. So that in this case, to do DIP extension, and right there I've got 8 degrees. That's IP extension of the thumb. Do I have an average? 0. Okay. And we could do that for the MCP also. So here's the MCP and extension. No, see, I may need to get, this was 0, just going that way, okay. Go ahead and relax for a minute. Okay, I'm getting 18 degrees. What do we have for MCP extension of the phone?
I think IP is 20 and MCP is 0.
Oh, MCP was 0. He's got 18. Okay, IP was 20. What were you?
Can't
8,
remember.
was like 8 degrees. Okay. All right. Okay, so the thing about the thumb, though, is a little tricky is when you get to the CMC joint. All right, so you'll want to watch this probably fairly carefully. Okay, so here's the motion I want you to do. Okay. All right, and you can curl your other fingers as you do that. Okay, so what motion is that at the thumb? Going in this way. That's flexion. Okay, and the starting position is with your thumb adducted to the side. So what I'm going to use is for the axis is the CMC joint, which remember you'll need to be able to show on the skeleton. So CMC joint between the trapezium and the proximal phalanx of the thumb right there. Okay, so we've got that where the axis is going to go. Where is the proximal arm going to line up with? Going to be with the radius. Okay, and then the distal arm is going to line up with the first metacarpal. So what do you notice about that? If I get lined up, okay, let's just keep your thumb in here. First metacarpal. Okay, so what do you notice? Am I at 0? Okay, so really, and this is not in your notes, so you really want to think about that, is you have to really look at where the starting position is. All right, and it's at, I would say, 44 degrees. So let's try to remember 44. Okay, now do that motion. Okay, and I'm still staying lined up with the first metacarpal. Now it's at 10 degrees. So I have to do 44 minus 10, which even I can do. It's 34, right? 34 degrees. So you have to subtract the ending position from the beginning position. Okay, so what do we have, just out of curiosity? 15 degrees. All right, so you're going to find some of these are really, you may be a lot different from what the average is supposed to be here. The same thing's going to be true for extension of the CMC joint. So remember, this is extension. Okay, so the motion I want you to do is like this. And you can pull your finger all the way out like that. Okay, so I'm going to line up again. Keep your thumb in for just a minute. Okay, I'm again at about 44 degrees. Okay, now do that motion for me. All the way out as far as you can. Okay, now I'm at 79 degrees. 79 minus 44. Anybody figure that out real quick? How much?
35.
35 degrees. We have 20 degrees is an average. Okay, so for CMC, not MCP, but CMC, flexion and extension, you're going to have to subtract your ending range from what the starting point is. So that one's a little bit different. So when you look in your book does talk about that. So I should have that in your notes. I'm not sure why it's not in your notes. It was last year, and I think I took them out for some reason. Okay, any comments on that? CMC, flexion, and extension? Now, when we get to abduction, okay, you'll find is you really do have a 0 starting position here. So you don't have to subtract for CMC abduction. All right, and what am I going to use for my landmarks? Again, notice for, let's see, abduction. Notice that the axis is not on the CMC joint necessarily. It's on the radiostyloid process right there. Okay, and then the proximal arm will be on the second metacarpal and the distal arm on the first metacarpal. So you got to make sure, think of what abduction is. It's going perpendicular to the palm. What plane is that in?
Frontal.
That's in a sagittal plane. And so your goniometer needs to be in the sagittal plane for the movement. So we're not like this, we're not like this. This is the way we are. And the movement I want you to do is like that. Actually, you can just hold it there. And the wrist should not be in any flexion or extension because that's going to throw off your measurement. So you have to have a neutral wrist. Okay, and I'm getting 46 degrees, I would say. And what do we have for?
70.
Okay, and I made a note to myself, and your book talks about this too. 70 degrees would be a whole lot of that, but your book uses an average that comes from the Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. They seem to use a different method for measuring abduction of the thumb. Right? And if you look at different sources, they'll have different average range of motion with a lot of these finger motions. So be as accurate as you can and just record what you get. And it might be fairly different from what we have for average ranges of motion in your nose. Okay? So with the abduction, there's no need to subtract because you are starting at 0 degrees. Flexion, extension, you do need to subtract. Okay, adduction isn't measured because you just look to see if you can put your thumb against your palm. And that leaves just one more thing, right? So what other motion do we have at the CMC joint? Position. And this one, it's not going to be a typical goniometric measurement. So what you're doing is really seeing if they can touch their thumb to the base of their little finger like that. Can you do that? Okay, and you say, looks like they can do opposition. If not, and there's some space there, what you can do, and there's just different methods to do this, but you measure the tip of the thumb to that base of the ring finger. So that one's just a little bit different. All right, let me see if there's anything I left off. Any questions about fingers or thumb? Range of motion. Yes.
With opposition, is it more like a length testing thing? So you would still use the goniometer to test the distance between the little finger and the thumb, right?
You could use a ruler, anything.
You could use anything as long as you're in the right position.
Yeah. So you're just saying the distance from the tip of, it's not a very exact measurement, or you're not actually measuring the joint range of motion. So it's kind of like doing a length measurement, muscle length, but we're not really testing a muscle length. We're seeing how much motion is at that joint. So it's just a different way of measuring it. Because there's not a good place you can put the goniometer for that. All right, while we're here, let's quickly look at muscle length testing.